A piece from the Itinerary, Kafka's Death House. In January 2014, Em and I stayed 4 days in Vienna, en route from Tel Aviv to Toronto. The main purpose of the stopover for me was to visit Franz Kafka's death house, Sterbehaus, located in Kierling near Klosterneuburg, 19 kilometers northwest of the capital. A devotee, I've slowly been tracing the author's wake. Em, my sometimes reluctant partner. Kafka died at the Hoffman Sanatorium on June 3, 1924, a month before his 41st birthday. He'd lived for 7 years with tuberculosis, which he viewed as a mix of gift, judgment, and punishment. At its final stage, the illness attacked his larynx. A cure for TB was decades away, and the painful treatment, which goes away again without helping, Kafka wrote on one of his final conversation slips, was camphor injections into the laryngeal nerve. Methods of feeding patients at advanced stages of throat illness had not yet been developed either, and at the end of his life, Kafka could not eat and could barely drink. As part of his treatment, he was instructed not to speak. He conversed with his little family of caregivers, his friend of 4 years, Dr. Robert Klopstock, and helpmate of 10 months, Dora Diamond, on conversation slips, his last writings. The final cause of death was likely starvation. It's sad and not a little ironic that on the day before he died, he was correcting the galley proofs of The Hunger Artist, Ein Hungerkünstler, the collection named for the story of a circus artist who makes his living by public fasting. He becomes a sideshow freak when the art he perfects loses popularity to a panther in the adjacent cage, and he fasts himself to death. On our 3rd morning in the city, I'd lain ill at the Hotel de France for 2 days with a mysterious illness of my own. Em and I took the train north to Heiligenstadt Station, the last stop on line U4 of the Vienna Rapid Transit System. There we purchased bus tickets to the medieval abbey town of Klosterneuburg. The day was cold, snowless, and gray. We sat at the back of the bus watching the suburbs blur by. I was preoccupied with thoughts of how we would reach our destination, so to speak, once we arrived. I hadn't found information regarding contacts, opening hours, tours, etc., and was counting on momentum. The bus ride ended at Klosterneuburg, where the spires of the medieval abbey rose into a misty void over the town, summoning images of the castle of Count West-West in Kafka's unfinished, posthumously published 3rd and last novel, The Castle, Das Schloss. We walked across the street to Buchhandlung John Duran, where I figured someone would be able to direct us to the Sterbehaus in Kierling. The woman at the counter spoke clear, clipped English. We don't often get people coming into the bookstore asking about the Kafka Museum. You are only about the 3rd and 4th in 20 years, she said quite seriously. The person you want is Herr Winkler, secretary of the Kafka Society. She happened to have Herr Winkler's phone number in her Rolodex and called him for us on the spot. There are 2 people here from Canada who have come to visit the Kafka Memorial Room. Gedenkraum, she announced into the receiver. It was mid-morning, and we'd apparently disturbed Herr Winkler's sleep, but he agreed to meet us in front of the Hofer. He will be there in 20 minutes, the woman told us. We browsed the bookstore, quickly purchased 2 books by way of appreciation, hailed a cab to Kierling, and arrived at the Hofer in under 20. The Hofer is a supermarket next to the former Hoffman Sanatorium, now a residential building. A man in a red and black jacket pulled into the car park a few minutes after we arrived, sprang out of his car, hastened toward us, extinguishing his cigarette, and introduced himself as Winkler Norbert, no longer secretary of the Kafka Society of Austria, but still on call for tours at the Kafka Memorial Room. He led us next door to the staid three-story building, its narrow entrance located oddly at the far right. A plaque to the left of the entrance identified the building as the Sterbehaus of Franz Kafka, and on the intercom panel, the names of the present residents. Barghouti, a prominent Palestinian surname I noticed, appeared twice. We followed Herr Winkler up the stairs. He unlocked the door to apartment 6, the Kafka Memorial Room. This is not the room where Kafka stayed, Herr Winkler informed us. Tenants occupy that space now, but the balcony where Kafka sat can be viewed from the Hofer car park. Kafka spent 7 weeks at the Hoffman Sanatorium, from April 19, 1924, till his death. Sunshine was prescribed for TB patients, and weather permitting, he would sit shirtless on the balcony, gazing at the garden below and into the firs and pines of the Vienna woods, the Wienerwald beyond. He was in the countryside, attended to around the clock by Robert Klopstock and Dora Diamond, whose hand he'd asked in marriage probably at the end of April, when hope of remission was buoyed by spring weather, country quiet, fresh fruit, and the scent of cut flowers. Lilacs, peonies, and columbine are named on the conversation slips. "Can't laburnum be found?" he wrote on one of the slips. Laburnum is a flowering shrub with bright yellow flowers. One wonders if he was aware that all parts of the plant are poisonous. The memorial room was stark. Medical records and death registers displayed in glass cases alongside instruments once used in treating TB. Copies of Kafka's last letters to his parents, a family tree, photos of Kafka, Klopstock, Dora, and others mounted on the high walls, historical photos of the sanatorium, a few chairs, a table, a guest book, which I signed, and a bookcase of books by and about the author. No original furnishings, nothing personal. I suppose I'd vaguely expected to see the actual room Kafka had slept in, preserved as it had been when he took his last breath, to feel something there of his presence. Herr Winkler showed us down the hall to the original elevator no longer in operation, which Kafka would have used on arrival and departure. The old apparatus reportedly made a huge racket and drained the village's electrical reserves so that flickering lights in the surrounding houses announced every use of the elevator on arrivals and departures at the Hoffman Sanatorium. We walked back down the stairs and out to view the rear of the building and the balcony on the second floor where Kafka sat and viewed the Wienerwald trees, evergreens in the distance. Herr Winkler offered us a lift back to Klosterneuburg, apologizing for the state of his car. He'd been transporting his girlfriend's dogs. We thanked him for his generosity, but neglected to give him a tip, which struck me as soon as we boarded the bus back to Heiligenstadt station. This oversight, which needles me whenever I think of it, can only be explained, though not excused, by our absorption in the day's extraordinary unfolding, how we'd been carried by some fortuitous momentum to entering the place where Kafka had languished and passed. There's no scoop to offer on Franz Kafka. He died at noon on June 3rd after begging morphine from Robert Klopstock. "Kill me," he said to have commanded his friend. or you're a murderer. Klopstock administered the morphine. He'd sent Dora on an errand so that she wouldn't be present at the time of the final ministrations. She returned with flowers, and Franz, it's told, inhaled their scent as he succumbed in her arms. What happened between that hour and the hour of his burial on June 11th at the new Jewish cemetery in Prague, Stražnice, is only sketchily on record. Jewish funerals are normally held as soon after death as possible, within a day or two at most. Kafka was buried 8 days after his death, and one wonders why the delay. He'd lived much of his life resisting life, and a certain recalcitrance seems to have attended his last passage as well. The great astronomical clock in Prague's old town square is said to have stopped still on June 11th at 4 p.m., precisely at the time of his interment.